Welcome back to Kingology. It's been a few months since we've recorded one of these, but we're back for the next book in Stephen King's set of written fiction and non-fiction works in chronological order. And the next one on the list is The Talisman. Talisman is a book co-written by Stephen King with Peter Straub. Peter Straub being a fairly famous and well-respected horror writer. His probably most famous work is probably Ghost Story. But he and King have had sort of a friendship and in this certainly a working relationship on and off for some time. I kind of was aware that Stephen King was a big admirer of Peter Straub, but when I read the book Danse Macabre, when he actually goes into some detail why he thinks Straub is a fine writer, giving quite a detailed account of some of his work and why he likes it. And this is a strange collaboration because it's very difficult by reading the book to know which bits are the bits King wrote and which bits are the bits Straub wrote. And reading up on it, it found out they were kind of going for that. King said he was deliberately trying to imitate Straub's style, and Straub was doing much the same back. It was kind of this interesting literary ping pong where they were trying to sort of reproduce each other's style. And to be honest, I've got no idea who wrote what sections. I've got a feeling that some of the more grim sections, more gross out sections, as it were, are almost definitely King, but I don't know that for sure. Now, as I said at the beginning, it's been a long time since the last Kingology, and that's just because I wanted a bit of a break, but also I've found this book quite a slog to get through. I'm going to be honest, it wasn't very enjoyable for me. It's got its moments. Firstly, there's some theme or influences in this book that's clear, and if you read up on it, they say it quite explicitly. Peter Straub, for example, says that Mark Twain was on their mind when they wrote this, and there's definitely a Mark Twain vibe, particularly a kind of Huckleberry Finn, a boy on an adventure kind of vibe. In fact, the main character's surname is Sawyer, Jack Sawyer, so there's Tom Sawyer there. But I also detected a sort of Hobbit / Lord of the Rings vibe to a sort of quest vibe, which I think I'll come to in a bit. Right, it's as I say, it's hard to know which bits are Straub, which bits are King. Having read both authors, though King way more than Straub. Straub's got a slightly more Spartan style, and he kind of uses odd events and dialogue that don't quite match up, and you can't quite put your finger on what's wrong with them, but it gives the whole feel of being unsettling, and there's certainly elements of that. But King does these tricks now and again, and I do believe King has been influenced somewhat by Straub. Actually, I could be wrong about that, but I just feel that. And like I say, I've been aware of this kind of how King feels about Straub since reading Danse Macabre, and I can, like I say, I can't detect the joins. They're clearly thinking about Mark Twain, and as I said, Straub specifically said that. Now, I had real trouble getting into this book because about the first half of the book, I really couldn't get into it. I just found it really difficult. There's going to be some spoilers there will be spoilers in this. I won't spoil it thoroughly, but there will be spoilers. So if you want to have this unspoiled, I would stop listening now. One of the issues with it had some repeating structure. For example, where Jack first gets in, he gets trapped in a place against his will, which is by a chap called Smokey, a bar. He's helping run a bar called the Oakley Tap. And it drags on a bit, and it felt a bit poorly resolved. The characters weren't... Smokey was actually probably one of the more fun characters, but it didn't quite feel resolved. The whole flip into a fantasy place up to this point felt ill-resolved, though it was quite well drawn when we first land there, but then it kind of wanders off and kind of snakes off into a sort of vagueness, which is a shame. So there's one whole section which I really didn't enjoy, where Jack kind of gets stuck at this place against his will. And then he escapes. And then we're followed up eventually by him being trapped in another place against his will, called by a chap called Sunlight Gardener, and it's the School for Wayward Boys. He's basically been caught as a runaway, and the sheriff just takes him to this place. While that was better, that part was certainly better written, much more interesting, not least because there was a character in it at this point who was a companion of Jack called Wolf, who was by far the best thing in this book, actually, in my opinion. But that repeating structure did not lend itself. I'd already felt it quite dragging through the Oakley Tap stuff, and when this started happening again, I kind of rolled my eyes and kind of gone with it. But actually, that was the point for me where the book picked up. It certainly seemed to get better there. And as I say, there's a character has been introduced to this book called Wolf, who's like a werewolf, a boy who's a werewolf. He's a much more interesting character. Now, it's interesting, this wolf thing. This is one of these things where King, I assume it's King, throws us a side loop by introducing something very arbitrary. He's got this way of doing this in some of his works, and it kind of makes it interesting because you can never quite predict. Whereas a lot of authors would just not even begin to write this sort of problem, right into this problem. King grabs it by both hands and goes with it. He does follow his muse. He famously follows his muse. So having a werewolf seems very odd, but actually it works completely. In the end, both Wolf and later on Jack gets another companion, Richard Sloat, sorry, I'm getting the Oakley Tap speaks up with that. Richard Sloat, the son of the main bad guy, Morgan Sloat, becomes his companion. Both those companions, certainly Wolf in particular, feel a bit like Sam Gamgee and Frodo. It's got that kind of feel. And if you plug into one, that Wolf is a werewolf, it also plugs into this whole thing about, a boy's best friend is his dog. There's that kind of meshing going on with Wolf. And Wolf is a really well-written and interesting character. As I say, my favourite character in this. I think the whole problem with this book for me was I didn't find Jack a particularly believable or interesting character. He was of interest, but it was more the people's reaction to him that I thought was more interesting. There was some odd stuff in here, like his mother giving him permission at 12 years old to go wandering around America. Seemed a bit silly, but it's not going to derail the whole book, but it just felt a bit odd. There's some other interesting characters in there. There's Speedy. Now there's a chap who's I think it's a musician in this world, called Speedy, who's like a black musician, but in the other world he's called Speedus, I believe. I'm a bit rusty on some of these names, and he's like a guard captain, I believe, in the other world. The whole premise is that there's the real world which we live in, and Jack is one of these people that's able to flip into another sort of version of this world, and there's a lot of people have got their twin versions in this world. Jack's version died very young, so Jack has become his sort of avatar. So wherever he goes, he kind of, that's him. He's not his copy or his twinner, as it's called in this book. He is that he stays where, his mind stays in his head, kind of thing. His body goes with him. I always, as I say, it's kind of interesting that King threw in a werewolf, but he does these sort of curveballs. An example of this is like the bomb right in the middle of the stand, which blows up half the cast, or King's choice in the Dark Tale series to have one of the main characters have no legs. How awkward is that as a writer to put that into a story about a massive journey, to have someone with no legs? Much easier to just write a character with legs, but this is King. There were some blandnesses though, as I say, I had problems with Jack the lead, but I also had quite strong problems with the bad guys. They felt really bland. Morgan Sloat just felt very bland to me. I just couldn't get a grip on him at all, and I wasn't interested in him, and I didn't think he was fun even. Sonny Gardner was more fun. and even Smoky Updike was more fun, but Morgan Slope just wasn't. They just felt anonymous. That was the problem. Even Smokey and Sonny felt kind of anonymous. If you compare them to some of the other good King bad guys, and I'm talking about the sort of real, not the monster type such as Pennywise or anything like that, but if you're talking about human bad guys, compare it to Greg Stilson, it's a world away. Randall Flagg, Randall Flagg's kind of supernatural. Randall Flagg is a world away from this bad guy. These bad guys just didn't work for me that well. I will say that I picked up definite fairy tale vibes in this. The whole, finding a wolf companion felt fairy tale-ish. The whole Jack being stopped and held against the door twice, in fact, as I said, felt like Pinocchio. So there was that. So, as I say, I had real trouble for the first half of this book. But when Wolf appears, I started to enjoy it way more. He just felt an odd character. But compared to the sort of blandness of Jack at this point, he's a real ray of sunshine, and also it gives Jack a chance to develop his character. We see him as a fundamentally good boy, but kind of selfish. He doesn't, and a bit prideful. There's one point they're being driven towards this place they're going to get locked up, and he's really unconcerned about how he's going to escape. He feels like it's going to be easy. And when Wolf gets extremely distressed because he gets put into spots where his senses tell him it's a bad place, mainly his nose, but other senses too, Jack is not entirely concerned about whether Wolf is that bothered. He feels a little selfish and prideful at that point. But Jack develops with his relationship with Wolf. Wolf develops, and he's actually becomes really concerned about Wolf. And I get to like Jack more at this point. So the book definitely opened up and improved me at this bit. If Wolf hadn't have been there, I think the whole book would have been a slog for me. Though I think I would have picked up a bit right at the end. But Wolf really helped me get into this book. His whole, allegory of a true faithful dog really stood up, and I really liked it. And later, when Wolf's been left behind and Richard comes on as his companion, Richard is a good friend too, and he has to persevere against really horrible things happening to him. He kind of reminded me, as I've already said, of Sam Gamgee, who's persevering at all odds as they approach Mount Doom in Lord of the Rings. There's plenty of traces here of King's other works. I think there are definite traces of the Dark Tower in some of the phrases they use. The Territories, sorry, I haven't even said this. The Territories is the name for this other alternative world that's going on. You get the feeling there might be multiple territories, thousands upon thousands of different versions, though Jack's flipping between just two of them. And that sort of parallel dimensionism kind of reminded me a bit of the Dark Tower. There's certainly bits where the veils between the different, dimensions are thin. That kind of phrasing's kind of used in here. There was a few other phrases that I can't remember that certainly seem to be shared with the Dark Tower. So there are equivalences and hints towards. So it's kind of cool. Apparently the sequel to this, which is Black House, which I'll get to eventually, makes the connections between the territories and the start events going on in this book and basically this universe tie much more strongly to the Dark Tower. But I haven't read it, and I don't want to spoil it, so I haven't read any more than just the fact that it does this. So I'm not going to say much more than that. I mean, apart from the Gunslinger, this is kind of King's first foray into full-blown fantasy in a novel. And I wonder how his regular readers really took to this. I've got a feeling it was a bit of a culture shock for them. I don't know. I have to say that this is probably one of the most least enjoyable of his novels so far for me. Like I said, there's interesting stuff. Apparently there's been a bit of development hell about this. There's some There's been various versions attempted to be brought to the screen, either a TV or movies. And actually, as a story, it's got a fairly solid core. It's just, I think it could be improved upon. A decent sort of showrunner or director, writer who worked on this could produce something really wonderful in terms of a film or a TV series. But this one for me felt a little... It just didn't work for me. I had real trouble with the characters and so on. It's certainly more towards the bottom of my list than the top. It's fun. Certainly the second half I found a lot more fun. And there was certainly one scene which I found extremely sad and quite moving, actually. I was really not expected to be moved at all in reading through the first half of this story, but I was quite affected by what happened. I didn't affect... I'm trying to decide whether to spoil it or not. I didn't affect to be so affected by what happened to one particular character. But, overall, the book did pick up for me. The middle section, I think, was the favourite. The stuff with Wolf and the Home for Wayward Boys was probably the bit I liked most. And the bits with Wolf before that also I quite liked. But the ending was fine. It just... Once Wolf was not in the story anymore, it just kind of felt a bit more flat to me. But Richard picked it up a bit. Having said that, Richard did pick it up. It wasn't a great book. I got a feeling in about a year I'll have real trouble remembering any of this story. So I'm just wondering, when I come to Black House, what I'll probably just have to read a reprise. Though I'll probably remember enough to get on with it. The Black House or the Black Hotel is a big presence in this book. In fact, you know what? I just wondered if this had some sort of influence on the stories of Twin Peaks, perhaps, because there's kind of elements going on. I've been looking at some of the reviews, and some people love this book. The stories of Travelling Jack, as it were, which is what the boys named early on, dubbed early on by Speedy. But I don't know. I also understand that you appreciate this book much more once you've read Black House. The sequel kind of fills out the prequel, makes more sense of the prequel than, the first one, I should say, the original story, than it does standing alone, which I don't think is a good thing to say about any book, frankly. But yeah, not a good one. I still liked it enough to say give it 6 out of 10. It's just way down on my list of the Stephen King books I've covered so far. Right, so next time I'm hoping to be covering Thinner. Thinner will be the book, Richard Bachman book, and the movie. There's a movie associated with this one. I have already read the book before in the past, so I'm quite familiar with the story, and I'm quite looking forward to seeing the movie version, because it kind of felt cinematic when I read it. I remember feeling that. Anyway, so that's this fairly short episode of Kingology, and bye from me.
A boy and his dog can go walking. A boy and his dog sometimes talk to each other. A boy and a dog can be happy sitting out in the woods on a log, but a dog knows his boy can go wrong. A boy and his dog can go fishing. A boy can teach a dog to bring a dish in when he's hungry. A boy and a dog can be happy sitting out in the woods on a log, but a dog knows his boy can go wrong.